All right, I think we can get the ball rolling. Welcome, everyone. I am Marguerite Zimmerman from equals MC squared, for those that don't know me. And today I'm really excited to be working with Jovan, with you, and sharing some information on the link between sales and mindfulness. So Jovan is been somebody now I've known for about a year?
Yes.
About a year, right?
Yeah, how time flies when you're having a good time.
It goes by very fast. And Jovan and I have been speaking about mindfulness for over the last year for, on a number of different levels. And today we're really excited to bring this webinar to you and to share a little bit about Jovan and his background. So Jovan Vuksanovich has a phenomenal background in mindfulness. He is a sales mindfulness master coach. He has been collaborating over the last year or so with us, and so because of that, I've learned an awful lot about mindfulness in a different way, and a lot about Jovan. So today we're going to both be speaking about mindfulness and a couple of key areas that we believe will create value for you. But we're also going to share a little bit about how Jovan used mindfulness in cold calling and in sales and in a number of different areas of his life, and how he was able to really take performance and really reach unparalleled results with compared to anyone in the market, right?
Yes, actually true. I mean, I had a distinct advantage over a lot of other people through mindfulness practice. To date now, it's about 42 years I've been practicing mindfulness, on a daily basis.
Okay,
So
shouldn't have said 42 years. It makes us feel aged.
I started when I was 3 years old.
When you were 3. I like that. I like it. When you were 3, you started. So for 14 years, Jovan used mindfulness in cold calling, and he actually achieved unparalleled results. Nobody's ever been able to meet or exceed that record for that he created. He's also used it in a number of other areas, and he synthesizes his knowledge and practice of yoga and Zen meditation and Gestalt therapy into mindfulness and sales. So without further ado, I'd like to have Jovan start the process. I'm just going to share a little bit of our objectives and turn it over to you.
Okay, great.
Okay, awesome. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about today, some of the core objectives, are why mindfulness has gone mainstream. So how is it that mindfulness has gone mainstream? At one point in time when I first learned about mindfulness, it was considered something that was very spiritual or not something that we would talk about in the corporate world. So we want to cover that a bit today.
Okay.
We want to cover a little bit about why mindfulness, what it is and what it isn't. So what really is mindfulness and what it isn't? And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the misnomers that are out there and some of the information that maybe isn't entirely accurate.
Right.
We're going to talk about how to use mindfulness in sales, and most importantly, a way for you to be able to start to use it in your own individual practices. And then we're going to get down to some Q&A, so you'll have an opportunity to throw some questions in to us through the webinar, and we'll address those questions. We're going to have about 10 minutes or so for questions, and we'll look forward to those.
Great.
Awesome, and we'll put you on the spot, Jovan.
Great.
Okay, so Jovan, maybe we could just start off by talking a little bit about what mindfulness is, and particularly about how it's gone mainstream. And you just came back from being in Silicon Valley, and you'd seen an awful lot going on with mindfulness, and you really saw this new focus in the corporate world. So maybe you could speak a little bit about what you saw happening in Silicon Valley, what you've been seeing happening in terms of it becoming so mainstream, and maybe even a little bit about the research that you've been seeing around the mindfulness.
Well, it's true. I was living in San Francisco the last 2 years and had the privilege of connecting with people at Apple and Uber and Google. All of these companies have mindfulness programs. And mindfulness is right across the board now. I mean, when I started into this practice like over 40 years ago, I remember being with Swami Satchidananda in Montreal, and he said to a small group of us, he said, you are 1 in a million, you people. Well, that has totally changed over the last 35 years. It is so mainstream. All those logos that you see up on the screen, I mean, mindfulness practice now is in the educational system, the penitentiary system, in the legal profession, all of the big companies. There's even a mindfulness program that's very successful now for several years with homeless people. So it includes us all. We're all involved in this. And one of the reasons for this that I would say, I would quote probably the greatest psychiatrist of the 20th century, Carl Jung. He said that our psyches are always seeking equilibrium, and so too on a collective level. I mean, on a daily basis, because of the technology, the information explosion that we're in, the World Wide Web, we're getting reports on terrorist attacks almost weekly now. In fact, this horrible thing that just happened recently, this young woman from Toronto who was part of the attack in London. I mean, all of this is immediate and coming to us through this 24-hour news. I mean, this is something that we're inundated with. We're collecting on an ongoing basis. So we need some kind of ongoing practice, if you will, to deal with this. And dealing with it means to be able to recognize it, feel it, experience it, and let it go. And the letting go brings you fully into the present moment. And the present moment, the feeling of the present moment is one of expansiveness. And when we're not in the present moment, the feeling is one of constriction, restriction, and anxiety.
And there's an awful lot of that today.
Yes, tremendous amount of anxiety. And, the good news is that mindfulness really affects the brain. MRIs prove that there's new neural pathways created through mindfulness practice. It boosts the immune system, lowers blood pressure, helps with chronic pain. All of this, there's so many benefits mentally and physically through mindfulness practice, because the suffering comes from the clinging. The Buddha said a long time ago, the source of all suffering is clinging. So this is letting go. It's a letting go process, and it's very simple.
So one of the things you've really noticed, even since you've been back in Toronto, is there's an awful lot about mindfulness. You were mentioning the other day, there was one, mindfulness sign related to a gym and, stretching.
Right.
So could we talk a little bit about what mindfulness is and what mindfulness isn't?
Well, mindfulness is a very natural practice. We're actually doing it more than we think, because, our authentic self is something that comes into this life nameless. I mean, every one of us gathered a name. Someone gave me the name of Jovan. I didn't come into this life saying, hey, I'm Jovan, and then learning the Serbian language first before learning English, and then all the Serbian narrative that comes down with that. So we're gathering, once we learn language, in fact, the terrible twos is the point around the age of 2 when we form our first rudimentary sentence. And we then rebel because we become an I and everybody else is out there as an object. And prior to that, we are flowing. We flow with our environment. There's no restriction. So language itself becomes, in a way, a trap. And then that language gathers more and more narratives, a family narrative, a cultural narrative, just a locale. I grew up in Northern Ontario. There was definitely a mining town narrative that I inherited. And then the meta narratives that come down, great religious traditions that we're born into, and on and on and on. So this is something that's ongoing. Our experience is ongoing. We're gathering and gathering. So we need an ongoing experience, to maybe let go of that. One of the misconceptions is that it's difficult to do, that you have to take years and years of this practice. Not so. In Zen, there's an expression. This is the open secret. We all know this. It's an open secret. They call it the open secret and the gateless gate, just to show that the authentic self is always present. We're never not here. It's our life force pouring through us. And as it pours through us, it makes conscious contact with others and gathers information. And some of that information can be hurtful and constrictive. So it is not one size fits all. There are some programs out there, for example, some people are into mantras and they give the same mantra to everybody. It's not that. What's really true here, just like our fingerprints and our DNA, our practice is unique to us because our own experience is our own. And when you get into the breathing, which is very, very, very simple, it's something that's going 24/7, you really become acquainted with coming home to yourself and letting go what's holding you back.
Very good. Very good. So you've spoke a little bit about one of the programs you were quite intrigued about with Goldie Hawn, and a bit of that, joke around, is it mindfulness or mindlessness? And she was talking about mindlessness. Can you speak a little bit about why, well, first of all, about even the program, but also why that, is, a term that, mind, why did she go with mindlessness instead of calling it mindfulness, right?
Well, all of us feel that our minds are full enough. Why would you want to practice, called mindfulness to fill up your mind even more? Mindfulness, from the original Buddhist term, mindfulness, is actually um, an experience of emptying your mind. So, in a sense, it's a paradox. The mind is full of empty. So when Goldie Hawn was making jokes about that, and by the way, I have a very, very close friend in San Francisco who's a Zen master. He's the head of a Korean lineage, and he makes jokes all the time. Less mind, he said, not more mind, less mind, less mind. So yes, Goldie Hawn has done something tremendous. She's a great actress and a comedian, but she believes that the mindfulness program called Mind Up that she's created is the greatest achievement of her life. And she achieved putting this together in Vancouver about 15 years ago with a group of psychologists and a lot of neuroscientists. And it's in the schooling system at a very early age, kindergarten, I think even preschool, certainly primary grades, all the way up to grade 12. It's so successful now, it's in about 13 countries. And my name, Vuksanovich, which is Serbian, it's even in Serbia right now and growing in leaps and bounds, growing in leaps and bounds. In fact, there's a major study being done by Harvard on her program because it takes a group that started as children and can follow them all the way through. And by the way, these children learn everything about the brain. It's all based on neuroscience. It's not some kind of hokey thing, esoteric thing, from 2,000 years ago. It's really teaching children at a very young age how their brain works and what happens when you do this process, how it actually changes the brain, the neuroplasticity of the brain. Very, very exciting. And these children, when they go home and they're practicing, their parents want to know. So the children are teaching the parents. And so the whole family is benefiting from this. And of course, the whole school, the teachers, and that community around that school. So that's why it's growing in leaps and bounds. And I think it's really exciting and proof that we're all involved in this, and this is not going away. It's only going to get greater and greater.
Really important. You just think about being able to quiet our minds at night when you can't sleep, but you also think about how much good we could do in the world by having people being more mindful or more mindless, however you want to look at it.
Yes, right.
However we want to look at it.
Well, when you strip everything away and you really get to that authentic self, remember when we were children. Just the other day, I was in a cafe and there was a little guy coming over to me, doing knuckles with me and high fives. And his mother was smiling and laughing, and everyone was smiling and laughing. And, he was before the level of language. So he's flowing with his whole environment. He doesn't know that he's supposed to be objectifying people with this strong sense of a separate I. It was really, really beautiful. So mindfulness is really returning to being in that state of a child before all of this came down. It's not to be childish, it's to be childlike. And in that childlikeness, just like that little guy yesterday, he was full of joy, full of happiness, wanted to share with me. There was no sense of an enemy or a threat or whatever. And of course, we can extend this to the kind of world we live in right now where there's so much hostility. In fact, David Bohm, the great physicist, said most people don't think, they just reassemble their prejudices. And so what we want to do is be able to witness those prejudices, those biases, things that we've gathered, feel them all the way down, and feel even the ill effect of them, especially, and let them go. Let them go. When we let them go, we have a spaciousness that we can respond there in that kind of childlike way that we all knew at one time. I mean, when we were children, if you and I were children playing out in the playground, we didn't go home and say to our mothers, Mom, I don't know if I was playing at my best with Marguerite. Could you show me how I could play better? Oh, geez, I think maybe, when I was on the merry-go-round, she was doing the merry-go-round better than me.
Of course I was. Of course I was.
But adults are doing this continuously, right?
We do. We're always questioning ourselves. And that kind of leads us into that whole conversation of the theater of our minds, right?
Yes.
And what's going on in our minds. And so could you speak a little bit about, why it's so important to clear our minds.
Well, just technically, we have a process that's going on continuously as a brain function, just like the heart has a function and the liver and the kidney. One of the brain functions, it's actually called the default network on the left side of the brain. Its function, when we're not focused on a sustained focus, what is called the task positive network, by default, it goes into the left side. And the left side, all it does, and it's staggering because they measure this with MRIs to the tune of about 70,000 thoughts a day, conscious and unconscious, is relive the past, usually negative. It seems like we remember negative things more than positive things. Memories and the accompanying feelings, sensations, and then projecting them into the future. It could be 5 minutes from now. And it's just 2 gears, back, forward, back, forward, back, forward, back, forward, like that. And that's very taxing on the brain. It takes a lot of energy to do that, to prop that up continuously. So when we focus on something that's a sustained focus, and this goes back to, the team building that I do with billiards, because I learned at a very early age, I fell in love with the game of snooker because it was a sustained focus. And as you're shooting shot by shot by shot, we pool players have an expression for the zone. We say in dead stroke with soft eyes. And dead stroke means that left side, that default network, is quiet like a corpse. It doesn't interfere. And you're just visualizing and letting it go. Visualizing and letting it go. And I did several shows for TSN, as you mentioned. One of them was with a sports vision specialist that showed me that all elite athletes are right hemisphere dominant. So that's what's happening here. All practices lead to be more intuitive, the way we were as children.
Yeah. So that kind of leads us to some of the things you've done in your previous world with the billiards in team building, which you still do, and also with the work you did in health and safety and how you use mindfulness in sales. And part of what you talked about with billiards is that importance of that moment where you get to come back to that here and now.
Right.
So could you speak a little bit about how you've used mindfulness in those experiences? And a little bit about how the importance of being able to get to that here and now constantly, and how and maybe share one of your techniques that you do for that.
Okay. Well, first off, the here and now is always here and now. I mean, that's why, all the Zen masters are laughing all the time. Again, it's the open secret. We're never not here. Have you ever been in a situation where you weren't there? It's a question of waking.
Is that a rhetorical
question? No, it's a question of waking up and realizing, remembering. It's not something that you achieve. It's not goal-oriented. It's not in the future. It's not like, okay, in the future, I'm going to be enlightened and all of that stuff. It's just returning back to the body. Marshall McLuhan said in the future, people will be discarnate entities. There's a lot of us flying around out in cyberspace all the time. Is to bring that attention back to the body and back to the breathing and realizing that, the present moment is always with us. So now in the game of pool and in team building events, I do just a simple technique. I'll ask someone at the beginning of the session, what time is it? And someone will say, 3 o'clock. And I say, whenever you hear the time, see the time, you hear it on the radio, somebody asks you the time, just simply say to yourself, here and now, because this is the reality. This mindfulness practice is all about facing reality as it's happening, I'm remembering that Woody Allen once said, everywhere I am, I want to be somewhere else. That to me is hell, because we are where we are. Let's come back to ourselves. So that's what we do in the game of billiards, and that's what I do with people. I just give them that, check in the time. You do this a few days, after a few weeks, after a few months, you realize that, stress has been called the hurry sickness, and it's very much based on time. And words and thought are synonymous with linear time, language. It takes time for me to say this to you. So when we let go of that, we go into a more timeless space. And the timeless space is the authentic self. It's timeless, formless, and therefore expansive and very, very intuitive. Very intuitive. Now, in the health and safety program, it was a 22-week program that I created. The first part of the training was presentation skills, and I brought in mindfulness practice right away. Afterwards, there were courses in labor relations, transportation of dangerous and hazardous goods, women's training, and CPR training. But it was all set up, predicated on health and safety coordinators influencing workers, have to influence them to be more awake, more present in the moment, so that there aren't accidents and injuries and, God forbid, death, right? So when it came to marketing in high net worth sales for both CIBC Wood Gundy and Edward Jones Investment, high net worth sales, I really worked on putting together, of course, the seminar content, inviting in great guest speakers, putting together packages of information to really help people. But when I actually contacted people, it was through cold calling. And between each call, I would focus in on my breath, realize that, I'm being centered, let go of the last call, understanding that the next person I'm talking to is a human being just like me. And, then I would make the call from that more authentic place. And what was really interesting, the chemistry of the call, more often than not, that person on the other end would sense that I was calling from not this fake it till you make it attitude, but from an actual, genuine attitude of authenticity, and they would respond that way. And I filled those seminars for years and years and years, and then ended up teaching financial advisors and branch office administrators how to talk to people on the phone.
Yeah, very interesting. So some of your experiences around cold calling were also kind of unique in the sense that once you got hold of somebody, you had also the highest rate of individuals who would show up.
Yes.
And
yes, I used to get calls actually from all over North America. It was quite humorous. I get a call from Tennessee and say, "Oh, we calling people, and they say they're coming, but they don't show up. Why do they keep showing up to your seminars?" And I say, "Well, it'll take me a little bit of time to communicate that, but you're probably thinking that you're a salesperson. You have this persona that you are somebody." I said, "I'm just nobody calling nobody." "What do you mean by that?" I said, "Well, I empty myself of this projected self, this constructed self, realizing that this narrative of who Jovan Vuksanovich is, I spell my name every day of the week. When I was in Yugoslavia, every second guy was Jovan. Every guy that I met, his name was Jovan. And my last name, Vuksanovich, was like Smith or Jones over there. Joe Smith, you know what I mean? So I would work on deconstructing what they thought was supposed to happen between one isolated person, the salesperson, and the other isolated person, the prospect. To me, in that openness, just like that child giving me knuckles and high-fiving, that's the attitude. People would connect to me on an emotional level, and then they would come out to those seminars.
Very good. We also talked a little bit about, some of the aspects around rewiring the brain and the importance of happiness first.
Right.
And I really wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and then how that ties into confidence and competence and selling. So that whole importance about, us, our brain and the lens of our brain.
Well, we are unhappy when we're not ourselves. And not ourselves means to be slaves to a constructed self, being slaves to the past. Because if you think of any memory, if you remember yourself 5 years ago, you can't enter that memory. You can't go back there. All you do is experience that memory where? Right here, right now in your body. And when it's right here, right now in your body, especially if it's negative, it neuters the living moment right now. It puts a pole right in the moment. It actually neuters the moment. So when you're really in that flow, letting go, the experience is one of a release of energy, because it takes a lot of energy to prop up this, as I said, about 70,000 thoughts per day, conscious and unconscious, to prop up this constructed self. That's a lot of work. When you let go of that, you release a lot of energy, and that energy is joy. Because you think of anything that makes you happy, anything at all, anything you're always totally immersed right in the process. If you love skiing and you're going down the hill, You're going down the hill, you're experiencing those bumps and turns, and you're nowhere else.
You're not thinking about what you have to do back at work.
No, you're not even.
You're there in that
you're,
moment.
you're there in the moment, and you get happiness from that. So this is the benefit when you're really fully engaged. You can see that I'm right here with you. I'm nowhere else. I'm right here, and there's energy here, and that energy is happiness, joy in living, and that is infectious. That emanates from yourself to someone else. Just like that child who was full of joy and knuckling me and high-fiving everybody in the restaurant. It's that kind of place. So it's been proven that when you're feeling that kind of joy, along with that goes gratitude. I mean, I'm very grateful to be here right now with you and, communicating to the people that are participating here. This gives me great joy and gratitude. And it's been shown that if you keep a journal just 3 times a day, the smallest things right in that journal, what you're grateful for, after 21 days, it actually changes your brain. Your brain starts to expect to be joyful. It expects to feel gratitude. It's proven with MRIs. This isn't hocus pocus. This is actually changing the brain. And as you say, changes the lens, how you see things. You see things differently. You start to see life as more extraordinary rather than ordinary. You're not caught up in the banal, which is your own, theater of the past, basically, over and over again. The present moment is fresh. It's brand new. It's never happened before. So how can it be old?
It can't be anything.
It can't be anything.
And it's, when you speak about young children, that's what we love, even watching them, the delight when they're experiencing things because they're so there for that experience. And you just see that joy, right? So
yeah,
it's so true.
I have to tell you a story. When I was at Edward Jones, I was working with Miriam Carl, who's the top woman high net worth person in Canada. And a young financial advisor came to her for advice in marketing and sales and everything. And she said, go over to Jovan's office. His door is open. Just stand there. He just laughs all day long. Right?
Yep.
Okay.
Because you're having fun.
That's right. And you're connecting with people,
absolutely.
and the energy's there. And everybody knows what's genuine and everybody knows what's fake. We know, everybody knows this. I'm convinced of this. Everybody knows everything. So, I say to people, be in the present moment, be who you are. Don't try to be anything other than you are, who you are. Who you are is adequate enough. It's enough. And if you trust that and you have that, you will be happy, you'll be full of energy, enthusiasm, and that will emanate and evoke that kind of response in anyone who's around you. And this idea of, calling people on the phone that they're strangers, I struck that out of my mind a long time ago through mindfulness practice. We're all in this together. It's a great whole, the whole cosmos. Nobody's outside of this. That's why in Zen they give images of the wave and the ocean. Each one of us is a wave. And sometimes the wave says, oh, look at me. I'm so different from you. But we're all part of the ocean. We are all the ocean. We go up for a while and, so I know I get a little bit carried away, but I get excited about this stuff.
I was just laughing though, because once we did the cardinal mistake is to turn your back to the ocean, apparently. Yes. And I did, and one of those rogue waves hit me, and it was like, oh yeah, cardinal mistake.
Exactly.
I like it when they're all just part of the ocean.
Right. So.
All right. So one of the other areas we talked a little bit about is the importance of, how do you start, and how do you really start in a way that is unique? Because we've talked about it being not a one size fits all.
Right.
So we've talked a little bit about practicing with the here and now.
Yeah.
So a lot of people on the call are related, are interested in sales, or they're either directly selling, or they sell an idea, or they sell in some way. So I'm kind of curious about how do you think we should get started, and then what would be the best path to do that?
The most natural place to start is with your own breathing, because it's happening constantly. I mean, even in deep sleep, in Zen practices, they say when a person is in deep sleep and not dreaming, do they know that they're alive or dead, male or female? But obviously there's something going on. There's a notion of the self that's not a thing. It's not some story going on, right? So begin with your breath. You can sit, you can do this walking, anywhere, but just bring your attention to your breathing. When you breathe in, the in-breath, just in your mind, hang out with that simple attention. If your mind wanders in any way, just gently bring it back. This process is practice is very gentle, no forcing of anything. Just keep bringing it back. And you'll realize that the in breath, there's a place where the in breath all the way in becomes the out breath. And where does the out breath end before it becomes the in breath? So in the beginning, it's kind of mechanical, like in, out, in, out, in, out. But after a while, it becomes like in, out. It becomes an elliptical kind. So once you experience that elliptical breath with your attention, your mind, you realize you're on this orbit that's effortless. And that feeling of the breath, the total breath, the complete breath, is beautiful. It's a beautiful experience, and it's something you don't have to try to do. There's no, you don't have to try to digest your food or whatever. If I've eaten a burrito, I don't have to say, "Excuse me, Marguerite, right now, I got to stop talking. I got a burrito right here that I have to focus on, and right beside it, a slice of pizza, and I've got to really focus on digesting." It happens automatically. Our bodies, the functions, there's so much that just happens spontaneously, and it's symbolic or indicative of the way life happens. It happens. And that's why I like to say, people in mindfulness practice should reframe the term or the words human being, not from a noun to a verb. Being. We are being. We are a verb. In fact, Buckminster Fuller wrote a book, I Seem to Be a Verb. So where there's this constant process of happening, that default network, it sticks a pole in the moment and says, like, Jovan is happening, Jovan is tasting, Jovan is hearing. So you should let go of that. And the best way is through the breath. And then you can do that walking anywhere that you are. You just focus in on the breath. Any other thoughts or impressions that come, you just let them happen. And sometimes these thoughts and impressions will carry with them a feeling, even a disturbing feeling. So mindfulness is all about accepting what happens as it happens. And in an advanced practice, which means like you just do it more and more and more, it's really easy to do. After a while, whatever the feeling is that may be interpreted as negative, as fear or anxiety, you just let go of the label. It's all about letting go. So when you let go of the label, something that was interpreted as fear, a pattern in the theater of the mind that was fear, now is just energy. It just becomes energy. And once it becomes energy, it starts to let go and flow, and then you're animated, you're alive. It's about like a quality of life. It's a lifestyle. It's a style of life. And it can be throughout all the practices that you do. Or I like to say that mindfulness is not a way, yet it illuminates all ways. If you're skiing or knitting or gardening or whatever, mindfully, then it just seems to illuminate all of the different activities of our life.
Very interesting. So when we think about then practicing mindfulness uniquely, I can practice it through my breath.
Yes.
Right. And I'm practicing it in everything that I do. Is there anything else that you would add that, even going back to your experiences with sales, any of your other experiences about, do I need to stop every day and, breathe several times a day, pay attention to my breathing? How do I make it work in my busy life?
Well, you know what? We live in a culture, the Western culture is a lot into, from the puritanical roots and everything, you got to work. The breath works all by itself. And it's been proven with MR.
Sure now.
Yeah. It does.
Really? Okay.
I'm sharing the secret with you.
That's a really big secret. Okay.
But it's been proven through MRIs now that soon as the brain gets a little bit of this information, it feels rest and it wants more. It'll seek it out. You'll find yourself being drawn to a book or maybe a seminar or something. This all happens very spontaneously, very, very spontaneously, because it brings rest. It brings rest to the brain that's really overworked, overtaxed, whatever. So don't worry about practice. Practice is practicing you. There's an expression in Zen, the seeker is the sought. The seeker is the sought. In other words, what you're seeking is seeking you. Mindfulness is seeking you as much as you're seeking mindfulness, probably a lot more. And all of these pressures that we're involved in right now, it's very mysterious how it seems like, there's terrible things happening over here. And yet over here, there's a mindfulness movement that's massive and worldwide throughout all of the discourses, all of the different ways that we are involved interacting with other human beings. So really trust the fact that this is a natural process and spontaneous. Even a few minutes here or there is great benefit, because that few minutes here or there, the brain feels rest. And as I said, proven by MRIs, it wants to know more of that. Why wouldn't it? I have a friend who's a Zen master, another guy in California, Paul Hederman, who, by the way, is going to be in Toronto tomorrow for a week. We're going to see him. We're going to actually meet him. Very interesting. We're going to meet him. But he just says, wouldn't you like to travel lighter? Wouldn't you like? This is all about traveling lighter. You're still going to go over the terrain of your life. You're still going to go over through your day, your family, your work life, all of that. There's still going to be the news pouring in. But would you like to travel lighter through all of that? So that's what mindfulness is about. Lightening up and traveling through what we do with more poise, ability to respond to situations with more clarity, more enthusiasm, more positivity. This is the yes at bottom of all, negation. It's the yes that's really life, the life force itself moving forward. And it's unstoppable. It really is in all of us. So we talked to just one or two more questions. Okay. But we talked a little bit about mindfulness not really being about, it's not about being a goal, right? Yes. So, a lot of us might come away saying, oh, I have a goal. I need to be more mindful. I need to practice mindfulness more. So what do you mean when you say it's not a goal? Well, because goals immediately suggest a future, right? Mm-hmm. And mindfulness is all about being in the present moment, present moment. So how can I demonstrate this? I'll go like this. All right, that happened. That's the first time. First time, the second time happened. First time, the third time happened. First time, the fourth time happened. They're all first times. That's right. Exactly. So, and the appropriate emotion is laughter. Yes. Once you get this, you start to laugh because you realize we're never not in the present moment. Yep. This idea of a future, goals and all this is fine. This is fine. It's practical. Language is for practical purposes. But there's experiences beyond language that we're experiencing all the time. And that is the fullness and the reality of the present moment. So if you will, the goal is to let go of goals and make the goal the present moment, because, it's already next week. We're going to be talking about this webinar. It's already next week. You understand? Exactly. Remember when we did that webinar? Exactly. We had so much fun doing the webinar, right? So even this is a memory right now, all right? It's a living memory. So that's why it's a lightening up. The idea of a goal, or the most spiritual goal, is enlightenment. And it's like the biggest carrot. It's always ahead. And, some people say, oh, in the next life or 50 more lives or whatever. Once you get rid of that. Sounds exhausting. That's right. It's very exhausting. It's exhausting. You gotta wait for 50 more lives. That's right. So once you drop all of that, you realize we're at our goal right now. The goal is here, to be here, our most authentic self, which is formless. That's why in Zen they say, you can't remember yourself because you've never forgotten yourself. It's a joke, It's like people say, we haven't forgotten who we are. We just have to clear away. It's actually a negation of what is not ourselves that we're doing through mindfulness. And what we're not is like this big bag of memories, this dragging this baggage with us. It's just memories. It's not real. It's just a memory of something that was real. Let go of that. So we were going to ask the audience if they had any questions. And if you have a question, you can type it into the question box. I believe you have to go to the top panel in your screen. We would welcome any questions from the audience. And while we're waiting to see if we get some questions, I'd like to
ask Jovan, if I could.
Sure.
Jovan, we've had lots of conversations about Momentium and why it excites you and the things that are in it. So how do you see Momentium and mindfulness aligning? Because obviously it's really important that we help people to be here and now. But can you tell me a little bit about what excited you about Momentum in terms of how it fits while I'm waiting for some Q&A to come from the audience?
Well, I was introduced to Momentum by our dear friend Nick Godfrey, who said to me, Jovan, I want you to come out to a meeting at the Oakville Club, the yacht club there, and I want you to meet this woman. And you were giving a presentation that day. And all of my experience in sales over many, many years, people used to say to me, Jovan, you should write a book. You should put this together, the success that you've had, and all this. And I used to feel a little bit, maybe I should do that. But when I sat there and you were giving your presentation, all I felt was, oh my God, here it is. This is the first person that I've met that's talking about sales the way I experienced it very directly. And you know that what I learned in the trenches. I didn't have the luxury of having someone like yourself, teach me and train me. So when I really saw what was happening with Momentum, I thought, wow, I want to be part of this. I want to be, because it's like so direct. It's all based on real knowledge in the real world, creating real results. So then, all of our talks about including mindfulness program was basically to enhance all of the subtlety and power, if I can say that, that's in Momentum. And, for anybody that's listening out there, I have never seen in all of my travels, which have been considerable, a program that's so comprehensive, so intelligent, that brings such incredible results as Momentum. And I'm talking from my own direct experience. I that day, I remember that day, and the way I responded to you right away, I said, this is world class. This should be everywhere. This is incredible. This is incredible. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
So in Momentum, we don't use mindfulness,
Right.
but we talk about flow, the psychology of flow,
Right.
the twin towers between anxiety and risk and boredom and monotony, and we talk about state. But mindfulness and a lot of these other practices there is so much different alignment. You also talked about a program in Toronto that has been running for a long time, and they didn't call it mindfulness because it wasn't really mainstream at that time. Yeah. And that program is worldwide, and that program was around stress, wasn't it?
Yes, it's by a fellow named Eli Bay that I met 30 some years ago in Toronto. And he named his company the Relaxation Response. At that time, when mindfulness was coming out, a lot of people were associating it with Buddhism because that's the origin. And they thought, well, maybe this is some kind of religious thing or whatever. And Eli decided to name his company the Relaxation Response. So whether we call this flow, the relaxation response, mindfulness, this is a very natural process when something is done correctly. Right. So when you're doing what you're doing as far as teaching people through, a sales simulator and online coaches, the correct way to sell, which has so much to do with learning about who you are and who the other is. The fact that, you teach people about different personality types, how people like to be spoken to. I myself learned that in the trenches. I learned to mirror people in phone calls, the tone of their voice, or, the cadence of their voice, or how they came on, So all of these, if you say these expressions, they really are talking about the same thing. They're really talking about a certain attitude. The opposite to this attitude, which I used to hear a lot 30 years ago or even more recently, fake it till you make it. No, it's having real knowledge, really being prepared, and that preparedness is then communicated, and the person on the other end of it feels that, because each and every one of us is legitimately our direct self, our true self.
Very helpful. We have a couple of questions. One of them is, and I'll try to do justice in reading it fully. Can you comment on the concept, the mind is never really empty? It is always active, but mindfulness is rather the process of recognizing you are thinking of something or are elsewhere, and that the recognition of that and coming back to the breath or focus is the process of being mindful. are you practicing more the ability to recognize it? It becomes easier. I don't think I. So I think it's something like, are you, is the practice the ability to recognize it makes it easier, or becomes easier?
Yeah, well, this is really an excellent question, because when I was in Silicon Valley and I was doing so much research on mindfulness and also Advaita, non-duality, and all the people who were in the business of it, I found out like something absolutely remarkable in most recent information in neuroscience. So it turns out with all of our senses, our five senses, and our mind that collects the information from these senses, a brain function that they estimate began as a mutation about 40,000 years ago when we were hunters and gatherers. Right now, in 500th of a second after I start speaking, it says, Jovan is speaking. So if I'm having some tea and I sip on my tea, right after I sip on my tea, this brain function says, Jovan is tasting the tea. If I'm hearing a sound, all the senses, 500th of a second, it's that fast. And because it's so quick, most people don't notice it. So mindfulness practice, when you realize that thoughts are happening continuously, spontaneously, and the idea is not to try to, stop the thinking. In fact, one great Zen master said, if you want to stop your thinking, commit suicide. So the thinking is always happening. It's a natural brain function. And what it does is it points back to the body, the physical body, because it's an organ in the body, just like the liver, kidneys, or whatever, to say the physical body is yourself, is the self, is your I. All right. This is this function. So when we are in a mindfulness process, we can then see all of these thoughts happening spontaneously. And it's the identification with them that creates this sense of a solid I. They map the brain with MRIs. There's no place in the brain where there is a solid I. There's no solid I. It takes 70,000 thoughts of this brain function a day to prop up this notion of a separate I. And when you go to, quantum physics and they go, subatomically, what they find out that there's one energy there. So I like to stick to the most recent neuroscience, and I like to stick to the most, recent science and quantum physics and all that, rather than go back 2,000 years ago, even though the information that was coming out there, was validating what the neuroscience is saying and vice versa. So yes, thoughts are happening all the time. It's the idea of not identifying with every thought that comes through, just like watching clouds in the sky. And then after a while, you start to see patterns. You see this thought hooked with that thought, and it creates like a sensation that goes with it, and it's linked to something in your distant past. You can just say, oh, yes, yes. There's just a saying yes, an acceptance, and then there's less interest, if you will, in being pulled along by that. In other words, the relationship between the stimulus and the response, the gap starts to get bigger. There's more space, so you don't have to be hooked into these things. They're still there, but the thoughts go back, in a sense, to the back of the mind. You can hear them, but you're not listening in the sense of identifying with them that much. And that creates the openness that you really are. That's your natural self, openness, being open.